Right, so greetings, hello.
Wow.
Pleasant to be here with Larysa Karachevtseva, a philosopher from the Ukraine, and I'm going to be interviewing her shortly about the life and works of a very famous Ukrainian philosopher who's just had the 300th anniversary of his birth, in fact, Skovoroda. So, but before we start, Larysa, do just say a few words of introduction.
Okay, just a few words because as a person who work in the Gregory Skovoroda Institute of Philosophy, I should be humble as he follower. So I'm research fellow in the Institute of Philosophy of the National Academy of Science of Ukraine. Currently, I'm based in the Cambridge University. So this program for visiting scholars from Ukraine. Actually, program definitely has scholarly rescuing pretext. So I'm going to be 1 year here and conduct my research on eco-phenomenology. This is some words for me.
Right, fascinating stuff. Okay, well, I'm so glad you're in Cambridge and got out safely from Kyiv, which is, still under bombardment, and the electricity keeps getting shut off. It's
all my family is there, so I know very well on the daily basis what's going on, and sometimes it's really frightening, sometimes it's scary, and all my thoughts is in Ukraine.
Sure.
But let us be positive. Yeah.
No, that's why. Okay, so the background to this interview is it was his 300th anniversary of his birthday on December the 3rd, 1722, and I wanted to do this interview on December the 3rd, but you were busy. It was the end of term, so we pushed it to December 21st, which is winter solstice. So that's a good day to do the interview. So just tell me, I mean, he's probably, one of the most important of all Ukrainian philosophers. Do you know any celebrations being planned for his life and works?
Actually, it's a lot of celebration. First of all, I want to tell about perception of Gregory Skovoroda in Ukrainian intellectual circles and his importance in Ukrainian landscapes. So if we tell about Kant or about Hegel, we may say that this is a highly respectful and honored philosopher. I may tell that Gregory Skovoroda not only highly respected and honored, he is very much adorable in Ukrainian intellectual landscape. So if you want to show some videos how Ukrainian philosophers present Gregory Skovoroda, you usually see a smile on their face because a lot of sympathy to the subject of their conversation or discussion. About celebration, about the question. It's plenty of conferences dedicated to Gregory Skovoroda in Ukraine. So I may just, point out some of them. For instance, academic conference in my institution, Gregory Skovoroda Institute of Philosophy. It was a huge academic event with plenty of wonderful and excellent presentations. It was some conference made in Lviv. It was a wonderful event which our very much respected and colleagues from Kharkiv University done. So almost under the bullet, almost under, in these circumstances where every minute electricity might be, shut down, or so people doing a lot of the things and about cultural events. So in the center of Ukraine, in the Ukrainian house, was presented a wonderful exhibition called The World of Gregory Skovoroda, with many rare artifacts, with manuscripts, with his original handwriting text, and so on and so on. And the idea is also quite fascinated, I think. So there actually this exhibition was made in condition where people might appear with no light and electricity. That's why any exponent of this exhibition you may see with candle or with light, and is a very symbolic things behind behind this action, because the light of wisdom, the light of Gregory Skovoroda wisdom penetrates the darkness of our time. I think this is a very good symbolism behind all these actions.
Right, thank you. Well, there's a couple of good commemorations. My next question is, just in your own words, tell us, why is he important in the history of philosophy? You told us why he's important in Ukraine, but why should philosophers outside Ukraine like read him or study him?
So I would say, first of all, let us identify the time where Gregory Skovoroda lived. It was the epoch of enlightenment, and but we identify Gregory Skovoroda mostly as a late Baroque thinker who combine a very much from antinomies and controversies of this Baroque thinking. Also, if people interested in beginning of Ukrainian philosophical tradition, they definitely need to open the book of Gregory Skovoroda, because Gregory Skovoroda is a founding father of Ukrainian philosophy. So, and there is also one clash in history and philosophy, because Russian philosophy is also pretends that Gregory Skovoroda is a founding father of Russian intellectual tradition, philosophical tradition. So we have some debates around that. If you want to be somehow involved in this debate, so you definitely need to open Gregory Skovoroda and decide for yourself. So who is closer? Who is so for whom Gregory Skovoroda is founding father? Yeah, so we have a wonderful, I say sadly, a wonderful, how to say, answer on this question, because as you know, and half a year ago, on the May of 6th, the Russian attacks the museum of Gregory Skovoroda in Skovorodinivka, and definitely they attacking Ukrainian culture, and definitely they emphasize that that Gregory Skovoroda belongs to Ukrainian culture. So thank you very much, but Skovoroda will survive, and the museum will survive, etc.
Yeah,
so
yeah, coming up in a minute. I just want to stick with this, like we're trying to locate him in the context of East European philosophy. I mean, I got interested in the study of East European and Slavic philosophy when I did my degree in East European and Slavic history at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies, which is part of the University of London. And I discovered that very few people in England, very few people at Oxford or Cambridge, London, were interested in, they didn't know there was such a thing as East European philosophy or Russian philosophy even. And because it was the Cold War and we were in a nuclear arms race with the whole of the Soviet bloc, I took the view that as philosophers in the West, we should study East European and Russian philosophy, as a field. And there isn't still to this day a single chair in any British academic institution that looks at East European Russian philosophy. And so I started a philosophy club at the School of Slavonic Studies, and we used to have outside lecturers come in, and I studied it independently, and that's when I first came across this interesting intellectual, Skovoroda, as I call him. You pronounce the A at the end. I'm sorry, my pronunciation is bad.
Skovoroda.
But
Yeah.
what I would imagine, you see, I discovered him as a kindred spirit. He was a Platonist, he was a Christian mystic, he was an esoteric thinker. And I thought, wow, there was at least one philosopher there. But at the time, we're talking the late 80s, of course, at the end of the Cold War. Presumably, in those days, in the Soviet Union, he would have been taught as a backwater, as you call him, a baroque thinker. That's a polite word for saying, not relevant. And from a Marxist perspective, like in a materialist worldview, right, he would be as an idealist, wouldn't he? So presumably he wasn't studied very seriously back in the Soviet Union. Am I right or not?
No. I would say you are the correct answer. You are partially right. So I'm explaining why. So in Soviet Union, in Soviet philosophy, Gregory Skovoroda was very much identified as a pantheistic philosophy who identify God and nature. That is why it was done the next artificial step to say that Gregory Skovoroda was deep inside. He was deep inside materialistic, but the toxic influences of his time, idealistic, spiritual, mystical features present in his teaching because he cannot act in any other way. But see, he said that, for instance, the matter is eternal, that God is nature, so he is materialistical oriented. And I think it was a trick. It was a trick of our wise, philosophers, because otherwise, Gregory Skovoroda would be easily identified with, spiritual idealistic tradition, which very much denied in Soviet Union. So to preserve his heritage, we need to do such an artificial trick. I think the logic behind that was exactly, I'm sure that I'm almost correct. I can't say what people who collected his work in 1961. So the first fully elaborated collection of his work appeared just in 20th century. It's 1961. I mean academic edition. And my institute was very much involved in preparing this edition. One of the chief of the Gregory Skovoroda Institute, academic Shinkaruk, this is his surname, academic Shinkaruk was one of the editors of this first academic companion, not companion, but collection of Gregory Skovoroda works.
Right. No, that's good. Thank you for doing that. I hope we can get it translated into English. And my next question is, I got very interested in the field of studying East European Russian philosophy. I found a streak of very interesting thinkers like Solovyev, Shestov, Berdyaev. There's a kind of rational mysticism to me, which is the best bit about this tradition. Did they know about Skovoroda's work? Do you think Solovyev and Shestov?
Oh, he not just know about Skovoroda. So let us be precise, because the question, does they know about Skovoroda or about Skovoroda works? Because the answer will differ.
Both.
So both. Let us start with first sub-question to your question. Does Solovyev knew about Skovoroda? Definitely, he knew very well. More than that, he thought and he pretended that he is a descendant of Gregory Skovoroda, that he is, I think from his mother linkage, he somehow connected to to Gregory Skovoroda. Ancestor, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. What about Berdyaev and Shestov?
Yeah.
As far as I know, Berdyaev mentioned Skovoroda several times in his writings, and Shestov as well. But to say that there were much that we could find a very well elaborated understanding of Gregory Skovoroda, no, it seems to me for them, Gregory Skovoroda was quite bad word, but correct word, provincial. And although if you open Skovorda and open Solovyov or Shestov or Berdiaev in particular, you will find a lot of common ideas, a lot of common meanings, senses, plots as well. I think it was mostly because of common biblical tradition behind these writings.
Right.
And coming back to the first sub-question, did they know their writing? Unfortunately, the first writing of Gregory Skovoroda appeared in 1798. It was his dialogue Narcisse. And his writing was very much unknown because he mostly relied on oral tradition. He have never, occupied with the idea to publish his work. So his work was collected and published much later. So I think that Solovyov technically was not able to read Gregory Skovoroda works.
That explains it, yeah. So the next question, I just want to, he was a polymath, wasn't he? Typical
Polymath, yeah.
18th century kind of enlightenment period. And he was a genius in many different fields. Can you tell us some of the fields that he was active in? He wasn't just a philosopher in the technical sense. He was a polymath. What else?
Yeah. Oh, it's a very interesting question because we usually have one explanation for such people. We call them Renaissance people. So people who very much who is talented in different fields and have achievements in different fields. So I may just point out several important fields done. First of all, he was an excellent musician. When he was a young boy, he was participating in a singing group, choir. Yes.
All right.
Yes, and even he was invited to the court of Empress Elizaveta, so Elizabeth court, and Russian Empress.
Right.
Empress, if I pronounce correct, but anyway. So later, what happened to him? Although he had a very beautiful and fantastic voice, many people think that it was alto, so quite high. Definitely later, he lost this high voice and started to elaborate another field of his interest. He started to study intensively, and he entered to Kyiv Collegium, which now is National University of Kyiv Military Academy, which I graduated. So it's very symbolic figure, not only for my institute, but for my alma mater as well. Yeah. So I may tell a lot about that because it's a lot of praising rituals around statue of Gregory Skovoroda in my university. But let me finish with your with your question. So musician, later he was a student and he became a wonderful educator. So some landowners offered him to teach his children, and children admired him. Also, it was some clashes between him and children because, but in general, people. And by the way, he has his own technique of teaching. It was not a dogmatic, memorizing of Bible or some quotation, etc. So he was more creative and more friendly. I would say he was, right now we may say he was more compassionate and empathic with his pupils, and he was always, he was very open with them. So he is a very interesting educator. About musician, it's not question only about singing. He was also play 3 or even more different instruments. First of all, flute, and flute was always with him. When he became a traveler philosopher with knapsack and Bible, and it was always flute with him. Also, he played bandura. It's ancient, it's a Ukrainian national instrument, and bandura is also cymbal. What else? And yes, some people count even 4 instruments. So, but let us see. So, and also he wrote several, not several, a lot of songs, and some of them became a repertoire of, you know, blind singers. Is a certain, you know, vagant, you know, strata. Yes, strata in Ukraine of this time of 17th century, 18th century. So, and there is one very famous song. It's famous till now. It means every. So I pronounce it in original language. Всякому городу нрав и права, which we may translate as every city or every town has his own rights and habits. So, and also he was genius of aphoristic of parables, of aphorism and parables. I think. Do you know about his epitaph? No?
I don't think. Tell us.
Okay, I tell you. So although that Gregory Skovoroda was a very humble person and never present himself as something highly important, he did a fantastic PR strategy at the end of his life. Some people said, actually his biographer, Mikhailo Kavalinsky, insisted that Skovoroda anticipated the date of his death. That is why he started to prepare his own grave as a, you know, as a saint person almost. And he told to his closest people, the closest disciples, to write on his grave, on his tombstone, such words. The world tried to catch me, but did not succeed. The world tried to catch me, but did not succeed. And you know, it became one of the most popular, you know, sentence, and we still try to catch him, and you know, but we don't succeed. So actually, when you started to describe Gregory Skovoroda images, yes, so he's mystic, he's philosopher, he's this, he's that, he's everything of that, but at the same time, he's more than that. That's why we cannot catch him. One important to be 100% precise. When he what is meaning behind that? So Skovoroda was so well known in 18th century Ukraine that everybody, a lot of respected men offered him a very good position in collegia, in you know, so teaching position. But he denied and refuted quite firmly. So nobody could capture him with temptation of prestige or status. So he denied it completely, and he said that he preferred his life of traveler with this thinker beggar, because it's a freedom, it's a real freedom.
There was also a teacher in schools for a while. He was did he teach in like a lycée as a teacher?
He was teaching as we call it collegium. So before my university became university or academia, he was collegium, Kiev Collegium, or Kiev Mokla. Yes, later he was also taught in Pereyaslav Collegium. So he did some, obtained some position, and what he taught? He taught poetic, he taught languages, he taught rhetorics, and one more thing about Skovorda as polymath. He was multilinguistical person. So
he could read Latin and Greek. I mean, was he?
He could. Yes, it was classic education. So he knew Latin and Greek. He wrote on old Church Slavic. He also knew. He also wrote on so-called literary old Ukrainian. Some people say that he knew Hebrew as well.
Hebrew.
So, and it was a lot of and so.
What about German or French or English?
Yes, he also studied German, and some people, some researchers insist that he knew German quite well, so spoken German for sure. Right. I'm not sure about French, but Greek, Latin, German, Old Church Slavic, Old literary Ukrainian.
Right. And do you think he would have had, I mean, in his academic work, would he have had knowledge of European philosophers in the West? Like Kant was around at the same time. Do you think he knew anything about German philosophy? Or
actually, what we know, there is one theory, there is one hypothesis that Skovoroda, when he was traveled on Europe, on West, we call it it's still Eastern Europe, but when he traveled in Hungary, so and also possibly attended Vienna and possibly even Italy. So he might somehow know about teaching of Jakob Böhme, and this is mystical teaching. So
about Böhme.
he not commenting Kantian philosophy somehow. I would say that he is very antipodic to such person as Kant. It's a totally different style and style of thinking. Yeah. So and
Kant did have a pietist background,
and
did say that he only was so rationalist to prove that pure reason was insufficient, and eventually you had to make a leap of faith. There's a brilliant quote from Kant. Imagine Skovoroda and Kant would meet in the leap of faith somewhere.
Probably, but actually we know that this meeting never happened. And in contemporary, my colleagues, sometimes compare Skovoroda and Kant as two totally different branches of philosophy. One of them critical thinking, another one is very much mystical oriented and based on biblical tradition and a lot of practical wisdom and such.
What was his knowledge of the Bible? Was he because biblical studies was just beginning around then? Would he have had a critical understanding of the Bible, or would he have been a biblical literalist? How would he have read the Bible, do you think? Do we know?
Actually, it was a classes in Kiev Collegium, so definitely he knows this text in old church Slavic language. But what I'm entirely sure, you know, when he made a quotation in his text, when he quoted a Bible, it's always his interpretation or his memoir about this quotation in the Bible. And people did a special, so some scholars did a special research on this way of quotation, and they found one fascinating thing, because one fascinating thing. So what is it? He Skovorda knew a lot of translation in Bible, a lot of different translation. That is why it was a common, you know, it was his collective view of citation in Bible. So he knew certain verse in Latin, in Greek, in Hebrew, and in old church Slavic language. That's why it's very difficult to identify which text he quoted. So it was mostly memoir about, you know, this place in the Bible.
Okay.
Some people say that it was some evidence, mostly like rumors, that the Bible that he brought with himself in his knapsack was Jewish Bible, was a Torah. So people somehow connect him to Jewish tradition as well, but this is just rumors. This is not, you know, proved,
right?
Archive, you know, investigations.
Well, that's a fascinating field. I mean, we can only skate over the surface here. We're looking through.
Yeah, absolutely. I must say that. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
And later, when they're thawed, when we stop the war and the fighting in Ukraine, when we can all go to research and do all these things, right? But that leads me to my next question. You mentioned it already. The museum, which is dedicated to his life and work in a house where he spent some of his last years, was destroyed by a deliberate Russian missile attack on May the 6th and 7th this year, you know.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to that news? I mean, what do you feel? What do the average Ukrainian intellectuals feel about this?
First of all, I attended this museum in 2007 with my tutor, Viktor Malachov. We were on the conference dedicated to Gregory Skovoroda, and I remember this place very well. It's one of the most peaceful and, you know, quiet and very much idyllic place in Ukraine, in a rustic, very rustic style. So the reason behind attacking such a small and humble and you know, let me say, a very cute, you know, building, you know, I see no reason except destructing, you know, Ukrainian culture and the Ukrainian memory. So I was shocked, to be honest. The first impression was shocking, but later you're telling yourself, okay, it was so many events, shocking events that we see before May. So it was already Bucha, it was already Gostomel, it was already Irpin, it was already all these massacres. So what could we expect from this? Is absolutely barbarian.
Sure, I think
attitude with Ukrainians.
Your Minister of Culture in Ukraine called it an act of essentially psychological terrorism, you know, cultural warfare.
Yes, it's absolutely.
It's a very barbaric thing. It's like, you know, when the Nazis conquered Europe, they used to burn all the Jewish books. They used to gather them together and burn them all. Sort of cultural warfare against the Jews.
I must say, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We are very much familiar with this practice nowadays, because a lot of our libraries are destroyed. Our Ukrainian children writer was shot and was founded in mass grave. So
When
this
was that? Just say which massacre are you talking about there? Like
about Ukraine, about Izum massacre. So in Izum grave, we found the body of our child, our writer for children, Volodymyr Vakulenko. So it was
right.
some months ago. So.
Yeah, but it's like I've just been reading up on the history of Ukraine in the last few months because of this war, and I've discovered the war against Ukrainian intellectuals, back in the 1930s, was already a Russian thing that they used to try and erase the memory, the historical knowledge of Ukrainian people. What I don't understand, though, and this is a sort of question, I always thought Russians were quite intellectually interesting. I've been to the Institute of Philosophy in Moscow. I have Russian philosophy friends. I thought they were intelligent, and I thought they had a certain, inheritance of European understanding of philosophy. So how this kind of barbarism has been allowed to resurface is, I find it shocking. And I mean, I presume, that your officials, your Minister of Culture and so on, have they protested this to UNESCO and to the UN and stuff? I mean, surely more can be done on that level? I mean, the Russians rebuild this museum, shouldn't they? In my opinion. Do you agree?
Of course, first of all, let us first finish this horrible war, and later to think about how could we rebuild everything. It's a very painful question. I want to somehow to elaborate your idea that this I think this aggression against Ukrainian culture does not begin in 2022 or 2014. It was much earlier enterprise, and it's a very symbolic. I want just point out several dates, which might be quite remarkable. And look, December, we are speaking in 21 of December in 2022. Yes, it's more than 300 days of Russian-Ukrainian war. Yes, aggression against Ukraine. And the same time, this is 300 years of this is Gregory Skovoroda anniversary. And Skovorda was born in 1722. The Russian Empire as an empire, as an entity, started in 1721. So a year before Skovoroda was born. If we do some researches and traces on Skovoroda languages, it's very much visible that he started to change his language from Ukrainian to more Russian. So he changes his formulation because in that time, Ukraine was already, first of all, it was a Kazakh state on the independent state on the territory of Ukraine, yes, but the state gradually was gradually losing his sovereignty and become under protection of Russian Empire. So you see this gradual russification, gradual substitution, one culture substitute another culture, yes. And what we, coming back to our present time, yes, what we see in December, some more dates. in the 30th of December of 1922, Soviet Union was established. Soviet Union appeared. So continuation of Russian Empire, one of the monstrous political entity which we have ever seen on the surface. And other date, December 30, but 1930. So it's 8 years later after Soviet Union appeared as a political entity. So it was one of the horrible events happened in the territory of Ukraine when Soviet Union authorities invited traveling sinners. We call them kovzari. This is people who preserve oral cultures, so through songs from and they were invited to in Kharkiv, and all of them were shot. It was about 300 persons were shot in this day. So it's a huge tragedy, you know. And Skovorda was very much belonged to this oral culture, to this because a lot of these people was singing his song, you know, who preserving this Ukrainian heritage. And it's a multiple events like that, multiple events. So that is why, this culture side, if you said, it's a you know, we already familiar with such words as eco side, omni side, but this culture side against Ukraine started, you know,
back in the
many centuries before.
Right.
2022. Yes.
You're telling me something about this, but my next question was, what would his attitude be if Doctor Who could travel back in time and bring him in his TARDIS to Cambridge and he was there with you? What would Skovoroda's attitude be to the Russian invasion of February this year? What would he be doing if he was alive now? And did he ever see a battle? Was he ever in a war that you know of?
It looks like he wasn't thinking about war. He was mostly a thinker of peace. But we may see some words in his song called "De Libertate," about freedom, when he called founder of Ukrainian independent state, I mean Cossack state, Bogdan Khmelnytsky, founder of freedom, father of freedom. That is why I think right now Skovorda is also a symbolic figure for us, because the freedom is one of the most important, I mean, the most important value for Ukrainians, and I think he will be very much with us. You know, telling about non-violence, yes, about not harmful, not violent attitude. You know, we should be very much, you know, we should be very much careful with the finding of the story, because sometimes absence of action brings more violence than, you know, direct defense or, you know, full-fledged fight against aggressor. So this is my answer. So I think Skovorda will be very, very much with us. Okay.
Yes, and I read that I think Zelensky has just organized for some musicians to go to the front line. And so as bards, you know, musicians also have to go to the front line and cheer up, you know, and rally the morale of people.
Yes.
In the British Army, they have bagpipes go and play. You know, it's the same idea. In the Celtic, the Druids,
yeah, it's very much like that.
Used to use a special kind of trumpet, bronze trumpet, at the front line. So, okay, my next question is about, you mentioned the Cossack dimension of Ukrainian identity. I mean, I read that he was a Cossack himself. So my question,
No,
what,
he wasn't. He wasn't.
what,
He wasn't Cossack.
what was he
His
thought of?
father was Cossack.
Was he a Ukrainian? Was he a Cossack? Was he a Christian? Or was he a loyal subject to the Russian Empire? If you interviewed him and asked what is your identity, what would he have said in those days?
I think I'm not eligible to say something instead of Skovoroda, but I would like to, rely on some historical, knowledge. So first of all, our understanding of nation or state were formed in 19th century, was fully formed in 19th century, not in 18th. That is why probably Skovoroda in some sense will misunderstood, this question of defending nation, defending, this defending state and etc. So in this sense, Skovoroda was pre-modern thinking, not modern thinking, but pre-modern thinking. But he was very much attached to his motherland, and this is for sure. He expresses many times and in many ways. And after his several years traveling, what we call it now abroad in Hungary, he come back to his Sloboda, Ukraine. So right now it's Kharkivska Oblast, and he never, left his motherland. It was the most, important contact, for him. One more thing. Also, that some people, some researchers and scholars see Skovoroda indifferent to political, political affairs of this time. Skovoroda was very much critical about Moscow Church, and that is why I would say he was more attached to his native Ukrainian traditions, so not to very dogmatical, very, I would say, yes, dogmatic and scholastic oriented, not thinking, not creative way of perception of God. Yeah.
Do we know if Tolstoy ever read him? I mean,
yes. Tolstoy admired him. Tolstoy, it's a confirmed fact. Tolstoy read Skovoroda and was fascinated of this
Christian anarchism. It's like a Gandhian.
Yes, it's very much like that.
Yeah. Great. So yes, I think I've answered the question I asked is, would he have been this, that, or the other? I think we might want to say he would say, what a silly question, I'm all of those things. And I'm none, and you can't catch me with a simple identity label. That's kind of probably what his position would have been. These names, they just tie you down. Okay, so the next question is, your Institute of Philosophy in Kyiv is named after him, where you've worked and so on for many years. Can you tell us about its work? What does it do? Why is it named after him? And how is it surviving? How is it surviving during the Russian attack? Is it still going? Is the lights on? What's happening?
What's happening? I'm started with the last, answering the last question and coming back to the first. So my Institute of Philosophy is fully functioning. Of course, all the administration attended at the building. Most of my fellows working either at home or abroad. So many of us have a scholarship or fellowship, but we absolutely attached to our academic life. pandemic taught us how to work distantly in distance. So actually, a month ago, I wrote my final year report about my academic achievement of 2022. So everything is functioning, and people are gathering and trying to be, in contact. And my research group is working. So one thing. Another thing, if you ask me, does Gregory Skovoroda Institute of Philosophy damaged? Yes, it was damaged. It was one missiles attack in the center of Kiev, and in several rooms of my institution, the window were broken totally. So we need to repair our building. What else about electricity? As far as I know, the internet is working in the Skovoroda Institute. That's why it was several video conferences. So it was student conference, PhD student of this institution.
Why was it named after him? That was the last question.
Oh, the last question. I would say this is a beautiful controversy. I love this question because it may come back us to Baroque antinomies. Don't you find hilarious and fascinating that academic institution with very elaborated hierarchies of posts, positions, duties, ranks, academic, awardings and everything was named after Gregory Skovoroda, who denied any position, any ranks, any academic degrees, and preferred to be a, beggar thinker, but not established professional, teacher of philosophy. I find it, fascinating. I think we are still in these Baroque controversies. Yeah, and what I may say about my institution? If you ask me, do we preserve somehow his, I would say, taste of his teaching, and do we have some features in our way of work? And yes, it appeared one interesting circle. We call it Kyiv Anthropological Worldview School, who was, who dealt with the relation of human to the world. This worldview subject with this practical wisdom and elaborated these human-world relations. And it was such a category as Sophia, as wisdom, is quite important for this circle of researchers. Although, of course, we are much more rationalistic and much more critical thinking than Gregory Skovoroda.
Sure, thank you very much. So you've said a few things, but could you tell us a bit about your own training as a philosopher? You studied at the university, the Skovoroda University in Kyiv. What got you interested in philosophy, and what did you do?
I would say my background no less diverse than Skovoroda's background, because I started with the same when I entered to university and became a student. I started with the same subject as you. I started with Russian religious tradition with such person called Vysheslavtsev. Later, I continued to work with that. It was my next author was Alexei Losiev, and I wrote a lot of I wrote a text about symbols, about myth. Later, my interest changes, but not drastically. We didn't point out such beautiful contemporary of Gregory Skovoroda as Johann Wolfgang Goethe, and my bachelor degree thesis was dedicated to philosophy of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Later, I started my phenomenological researches, and I was very much fascinated by Gusserl teaching, Heidegger teaching, and I wrote my MA on Merleau-Ponty. Later, I decided that I'm not critical about Heidegger. I'm very much, tempted by his way of thinking, and I found a philosopher who was in direct critique of this intellectual enterprise, and it was Emmanuel Levinas. And I spent a lot of years, investigating and exploring this set of ideas. I defend my PhD thesis on the concept of subjectivity, and I was very much based on Emmanuel Levinas' notion of subjectivity, along with other authors like Marion, like Dominique Genico, and etc. So it was a collective critique of Heidegger way of thinking. And after defending my PhD, I turned back to my Kiev Mohyla Academy, to my alma mater institute, with one, with one aim. I've understood that I knew nothing. I'm not very much knowledgeable about Jewish background of the Emmanuel Levinas, and I decided to take a systematic education. And I spent 2 years on the special certificate program, and later 1 year in a special certificate program in Sweden. And then after that, I became a teacher of Jewish philosophy. And when I started to teach more Jewish philosophy, I did my first trip in India and met Jain people. And so I found that Anekantavada is absolutely beautiful dialectics, which I need to know more. And till now, I'm,
through the Jains. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, I'm very tempted to follow up with this, because we met at a Jain conference on peace and nonviolence in Delhi in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And you already started to answer it. The Jain philosophers have stubbornly insisted that ahimsa, nonviolence, has to be adhered to by philosophers. Did Skovoroda ever write about ahimsa? We know Tolstoy did, obviously.
Yes.
But had the idea of nonviolence, it's there in the Gospels, I suppose, isn't it? Was it in the thought world of Skovoroda? Did he ever write about this idea of nonviolence at all?
I may rephrase that he wrote very much about harmony with both, non-harmful harmony with both, non-harmful connection with both.
Talked about non-harming. Yeah.
Yes. I would say very balanced. To answer this question, I want to do one confession. So when I was reading Skovoroda with a Jain lens, I understood that many friends of mine who belong to this tradition will call Skovoroda Jain philosopher for sure, or Jain saint man, because there is so many common features. There is so many values. You talk just about one value, ahimsa, but
Yeah.
this as some other. For instance, aparigraha, so the value of non-possession. Skovoroda was intentionally poor, and he insists that the less person keep with himself or herself, the better life he conduct. And yes, so it was a very clear aparigraha. Later, Anekantavada. So I already mentioned that this phrase, every city has his rights and habits. So every person has his own truth. Every citizen or every ethnical group should follow his own, rights and habits and way of life, and everything should be balanced. It's a very clear Anikantavada. It's very visible, and also some features of Skovoroda life, especially his last year. He for no reason he decided not to eat meat and fish, and he became a vegetarian, just some milk. So it's not a vegan, but this is a vegetarian. So he used some milk product. One thing also, he was never married, and he preferred friendly communication because he didn't want to be attached to to one established course of life. So he wanted to be free, and that is why he spent some time in celibacy. He was brahmacharya actually. So if you combine all of these, if we take into account that Jain never call other people Jain because of identity, if call another person Jain if he pursue some values and a certain way of life. So for them, Skovoroda was Jain philosopher for sure, and any doubt.
Okay, well that would be. I hope you write this up. You must write that up as an essay. That'd be great. Yes, I mean the Jain concept of spiritual non-violence and the values you talk about takes place in a cosmological context. A belief in reincarnation. The individual soul cannot reach purity in one lifetime, so we have to do it, gradually. And you might have been a warrior in one life, and eventually you grow out of it, and become a saint. Did Skovoroda show any knowledge of reincarnation that you know of? Did he ever discuss that, the more mystical side of things?
Actually, I did not find any traces. Definitely, I'm not a person of deep expertise of Skovoroda text. Maybe other scholars found these features, but I think he was very much based in his mother tradition. I mean Eastern Orthodoxy, and Eastern Orthodoxy deny any idea of reincarnation. So it's a officially established teaching deny idea of the soul migration.
It was a more Gnostic kind of idea, and I wonder if there's a collected works index. I mean, I wonder if Skovoroda's collected works has an index that one could then look up something like reincarnation. Do you know if there is an index to it?
There is, one person, a very prominent scholar on people Skovoroda teaching, did he called it seminarium. He put some topics of his teaching, and all the bibliography that was written was written on the subject. But if you ask me about definitely academic compendium has index, but I'm not sure that reincarnation will be in this index. I need to check this subject.
Because I'm very mindful that Helena Blavatsky was born in the Ukraine. She became the founder of the Theosophical Society, another great Ukrainian intellectual, 100 years after Skovoroda. And she threw herself into the study of reincarnation and Gnosticism and all esoteric theosophy, like more than anyone else in the 19th century. I wonder if she mentioned Skovoroda in her works, because she was proud of her background and used to go back to her family in the Ukraine. She was often traveling in Tibet, India, but she would always come back to the Ukraine. I just wonder if she mentioned Skovoroda, because he was a sort of theosophist in a sense, wasn't he?
I may tell only one thing on this subject. Of course, Blavatsky is a very specific figure for us. Gregory Skovoroda was very much against any what we call it sectarianism or some elitistic mystical group. So he was very much sure in his attachment to Eastern Orthodoxy Church. That's why any philosophical gaze speculation was alien to him. He was a master of practical wisdom, and was the most important in his teaching that he was a living representative of his teaching. He is living his truth. He's not teaching his truth, but he's living this truth. There is a lot. What is fascinating about Skovorda? So many people see evidence of Indian philosophy in his teaching. We talked already about Jains. Of course, he was not Jain as a identification, and for sure he met no Jain in his life. But I may found some fascinating thing. Resemblance of Jewish mystical teaching. So if we see the map of Ukraine of 18th century, we see that exactly in this time appeared such a remarkable heretic movement called Frankism. So it's descendants of Shabtai Tzvi, followers of Sabbatean movements, continuation of Sabbatean movements. And the leader, Jakob Frank, was lived in Podolia, in the region of Ukraine. So probably Skovorda might have known about these things.
Right.
And also, I see some ideas from Talmud. I see some hermeneutics, which very much like, rabbinic hermeneutics, but this is just a small,
Sure. No, those
small seeds.
You're like, that's going to be a question coming up quite shortly. I'm going to ask a bit more detail about the Jewish elements of Ukrainian culture. But before that, I want to come back to the, as intellectuals and historians of ideas, I think you probably would agree, we have a duty to try and understand what on earth is going on in Russia's mind or Putin's mind.
Mm-hmm.
Putin seems to have drawn on very sinister ideas. His KGB training, the influence of this sort of Russian fascist called Ivan Ilyin, who spent the war in Germany. Apparently Putin had him reburied in Russia. He loves him. He's his model. So if Ukrainians like Skovoroda, Putin likes Ivan Ilyin. And then he quotes Peter the Great, Ivan the Terrible, you're not allowed to criticize Stalin. Seems that Putin likes these really nasty guys. So, what do we do? What do you do? What is your institute doing about pointing this out? Because Putinism has become a big thing. People on the internet, he's very sexy. They love pictures of him riding on bears. Surely as intellectuals, we have a duty to kind of say this guy is following the wrong songs. You talk about heresy, and Skovoroda wanted wisdom for the people. This Putinism isn't about wisdom, isn't it? I mean, it seems to me it's about, I don't know, some kind of evil, sinister paranoia that he is taking on everyone else.
You should ask me why I'm laughing, because probably I need to ask you several. It's not provocative, but several questions, because I'm very fascinated how people on the West perceive such phenomenon as Russian religious philosophy. Do you know that a person whom you mentioned, Ivan Ilyin, is a very much representative of the same, he was at the same cohort as Berdiaev, Shesta.
Sure, no.
You know about that.
But he went
he wrote a very beautiful, a very beautifully elaborated, axioms of religious experience and etc. etc.
I'm aware that
So
it's intellectually attractive, but he took the dark side. I think
yes, he took the dark side. And by the way, philosopher whom I'm started my philosophical path, Boris Petrovich Vysheslavtsev, was also supportive of fascism. I discovered it quite, it was really recently. So it was not very much talked about that. The question is not in supporting fascism. The question is much more deeper, and I'm very grateful to my colleagues that investigate this concept of Russian world, Ruski Mir, very attentively and worked on them as with fascist doctrine. But this doctrine has deep roots, and these roots is, ladies and gentlemen, Russian religious philosophy. If you ask me, whether I see a linkage between Skovoroda and this interesting phenomenon, I would say yes and no, because there is a big, gap between them. Skovoroda was. I just want to explain, because this is important. This is the core of your question. Skovoroda was always grateful for, he was somehow Epicurean like. He was grateful for life. He was in harmony of life. He is praising God. He said that gratitude is a base of, human happiness, and this is a source of, fulfillment of human fulfillment. If he opened Berdiaev or Shestev or Ivan Ilyin, there was the, one plot. Reality is in danger, in catastrophe. Reality is totally corrupted. So they immediately start to be very judgmental about everything what is around. So everything in catastrophe. Who is responsible for this catastrophe? Of course, this Western corrupted rationalistic culture. So you, dearest Thomas Duffin, is representative, as an unlucky representative of a very corrupted, a very, damaged, Western thought and society. And where is the source of saving the world? Of course, it's a messianic role of Russian culture that should save the world, that should have, whose spirituality should be above all this non-spiritual Western culture, totally corrupted and damaged. And you will see this plot almost in every writing. And this scheme.
Is that what he was saying too? Was he a messianic thinker?
Yes, this is why it's a very, messianic oriented philosophy. And if you ask me whether Putin mad, no, Putin is not mad. Putin has his own logic, and his logic is very much coherent with this messianic self-awareness, that I am above you, because you, with your rationality, know nothing about real spirituality and real sense of life and real meaning, and only Russia could save you. That's why all your rational arguments just not working for us. We are exceptional,
Okay, so now you made a sort of defense of the Putinist Ruski Mir, the kind of idea there. Which
I would say that this phenomenon much more deeper than just reading Ilyin or pointing out the philosophy of Alexander Dugin. It has his beginning much before
It goes back a long way. I mean,
Soviet Union.
We're going to have a discussion about that, and you sort of a question like you were saying you wanted to ask me a question, so I'm going to take that as a question and give you a bit of a response. You see, I think that position is based on two false premises. We'll call that the Putin messianic war game scenario, right? I'm saying it's based on two false hypotheses. Firstly, no Messiah worth a candle, as we say in English, is going to be promoting their messianic worldview through violence. Those are called false messiahs, and the New Testament is very strict on that. You know, there will be people pretending to be messiahs. You have to call them out. And the one sure way of doing that is if they're promoting violence, those are cult leaders. Those are just like fanatic, and they come and go, you know. And in this case, we have one that's quite dangerous because he has nuclear weapons. But it's, you know, Hitler was another, Stalin was another. These are all false messianic things. So that's my first comment. That's why I love nonviolence as a sort of criterion of authenticity and truth. That's why I follow Gandhi's idea. Gandhi didn't say, let's get independence from Britain by launching secret bombing raids and setting up an underground army. That was the Indian fascist route. And the distinction between the fascist route is they always choose violence. And I don't agree with that because I'm a man of peace. So that's my fundamental critique of Putinists' militarism. They're militarizing the concept of messianism, which gets it a very bad name. There's, anyone that loves Christianity is weeping that this nation of so-called Christians, so-called Orthodox Christians, is attacking another nation of Christians, with many of them are Orthodox. I mean, it is an absolute moral catastrophe for Christianity.
Yes, true.
I used to belong to the Fellowship of St. Albans and St. Sergius in London, which is a dialogue group between Anglican Christians and Orthodox Christians. We used to go to services together. We would have discussions. They publish a journal, And as speaking on their behalf as an Anglican, I'm utterly ashamed for Christianity. This is like, it's as if the Christian story has deteriorated into a fake messianic war game, So that's my first comment. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is I want to oppose this idea that Western philosophers are all materialists and therefore evil, and Eastern philosophers are all spiritualists and therefore good because they've kept the true Christ light flying. I think that's a false reading of the history of Western philosophy by someone that doesn't know much about it. If you study Western philosophy, whatever that means, I don't know. Let's say it's French, British, German, Italian, Spanish, American, the whole history of philosophy in the Western world, so-called, is very, very complex. We have tremendous currents of idealism, of spiritualism. We have, going back to the ancient Druids, they were like the Jains of the Celtic world, that I'm very interested in and have studied and written an encyclopedia about. They're the esoteric core of the Celtic world, which is about as West as you can get. So to sort of, only somebody with no knowledge of Western philosophy would attempt to say, we're the idealist spiritual people, we're the light bringers, and you're the horrible materialists. No, that's a complete misrepresentation. And it's also ironic, coming from a nation, Russia, who up until a few decades ago were sunk into a philosophy of materialism that was the most simplistic form of materialism. I mean, dialectical materialism had a bit of some intellectual people, and it had some good people in it, and but on the whole, it was quite simplistic in its materialist view of history, and that was very frustrating to people in the West as well as in the East. People like Solzhenitsyn, they suffered because of this dialectical materialism. So what's ironic is that Russia should now be saying, in this Russian fascist brand, we're the spiritual people of history, come to save you from materialism. I think what's going on psychologically is a sort of, I don't know, it's like they're trying to forget their own history, because I wish Russian intellectuals would come to terms with the fact that it did pursue a dialectical materialist path. It did outlaw spiritualism. It did persecute Christians. it did try and silence all religion for many, many decades. I'm reading the life story of Lazar Kaganovich, who was a very brutal Bolshevik, and he was personally partly responsible for the Holodomor.
Yes.
He was typical of these people that they went into a moral catastrophe in the name of materialism, you know. So if we're going to have a discussion, a mature discussion about West versus East, materialism versus religion, let's have an intelligent discussion. And that's not what Dugin and Putin are doing. They're just like adolescents when it comes, in my opinion, humbly, when it comes to the history of philosophy. They're throwing bombs around, which are killing my friends in Ukraine, you know. So anyway, that's my response to your question. Those are two critiques I've got of that Putin position. You know, we could go on about that, but let's move on to the next question, which is interesting, I think. What do you know about Skovoroda's attitude to Islam and other world religions? Did he ever mention Buddhism, say, or Jains? And what about Judaism? Did he have a knowledge of other religions like Islam? Because Ukraine used to have an Islamic culture, didn't it? And there are still some Muslims around, even now, I believe. What did he say about other religions?
First of all, if we take into account that Skovoroda knew Hebrew and some of his contemporaries thought that his Bible was actually Torah, and also other people insisted in other Skovoroda's contemporaries wrote that Skovoroda was invited to some synagogue and speak in Hebrew with rabbis. So we may presume at least that he was friendly with Jewish tradition. More than that, when he writing his name, he doing this in Judaic gears, I mean Jewish gears. I mean he signing as a Gregory Sava Skovoroda. Var Sava means Bar Sava, son of Sava. So it was Jewish presentation.
Oh, okay.
And this one thing. Another thing which I found a little bit shocking for me, I opened one of his late dialogue called "The Snake Plot," and this metaphor of snake is absolutely fascinating because he discovered snake not only the evil figure but very much attached to the God divine, to the divine power, and it's a very much Sabbatian interpretation of it's a Sabbatian metaphor, one of the most important metaphors in Sabbatian teaching. Probably it was what you call cross-cultural ideas. It was something in the air, and Skovoroda, as Baroque thinker, decided to implement some of this idea to his writings. Also, it was a metaphor of the snake who bites his own tail, Ouroboros.
Yeah.
And it's an Indian symbol, an Indian archetype. So if you ask me, did he explicitly tell about other religions? He tell about other ethnicities, for instance, Tatarian, Jewish people are there in the sense that everybody should follow their own habits and their own truths and their own paths. So he was very much in peace with all of them. But this, interesting resemblance of other religions, definitely they are provoking, but there is no evidence that he how to say, intentionally take from other religions, or were in contact with other religious groups like Hasidic people or Sabbateans or Indians, etc.
So he wrote about the snake as a symbol of wisdom. That's interesting.
Yes, yes.
In the Gospels, this is why when people grumble about, Gnosticism and so on, I mean, I always point out that the Gospels, like Clement of Alexandria, who's one of my heroes, he said that no, there's a Christian Gnosticism in the Gospels. And when Christ told his disciples to be as wise as a serpent and as innocent as a dove, that to me is the proof text for Christian philosophers. We should be wise as serpents, be prepared to die and be reborn and die again and get rid of ego, which is what that's all about. But then be innocent as a dove, i.e. non-violent, loving. It's just that's. So I mean, I'd be interested did Skovoroda in that essay on the snake, did he mention that text?
He was actually, yes, he mentioned this text. It's I remember this, and the Clement from the Alexandria was one of his authors that he knew very well, as well as antique philosophers and Philo from Alexandria was very much cited by Skovoroda, and by the way, Skovorda was very much impressed by this book from Jewish Torah, how we call Old Testament. Yes, Jesus, the son of Sirach. It was a absolutely fascinating text about God's wisdom. Yes, Ecclesiastes. Yes.
It's an
yes, Ecclesiastes.
wisdom.
Yeah. Yes, it was a tractate about wisdom and different features of wisdom, and Skovoroda implementing this text very much.
I love that book itself. It's one of my favorite books in the Bible.
Yeah. And when I'm teaching philo, when I'm teaching the course of Jewish philosophy, and we approaching to philo, we beginning with reading this text about wisdom, and
it's one of the core texts for all true philosophers, in my opinion. So my next question is, since you're an expert on the history of Jewish thought, and you know that Ukraine was a cradle of the Hasidic movement, I've always been fascinated by the history of the Hasidics. Baal Shem Tov particularly, but all the other disciples that went out. And these were amazing. They were healers. They all studied the Qabalah, and did they? Do you know much about the Hasidic movement? Did they study other religions? I mean, obviously Frank studied Christianity, and to the extent that he became one. But within the Hasidic worldview, do you think? What's the role of other religions? I mean, would they have known about Skovoroda, for instance, as a kind of Christian?
I'm not sure. Actually, there is a lot of rumors around this movement. So, first of all, it seems to me Elie Wiesel, in his fairy tales about Hasidic leaders, mentioned one parable that Baal Shem Tov, or his disciple, show the person who is Christian, and this Christian person didn't do this ritual, crossing, and Baal Shem Tov was, or not Baal Shem Tov, I'm not sure, but this saint, this Hasidic person said, "Look, this Christian not loyal to his religion. You should be loyal to your religion and stay in your tradition firmly. So be loyal to God in your own path." So it was one thing. Another thing, there is one scholar in Ukraine. His name is Igor Turov, and he offered an hypothesis that the graves, the tzaddik graves, and this ohel. Yes, we know about that. They are very much like graves of Saint Orthodox leaders, recognized as a saint, and became a place of worshiping as well. So some rituals as well. So probably it was cross-cultural influences. But still, this is just rumors and hypotheses. Nothing is confirmed.
That scientifically yet that you know of.
Yes, but everything what I know about Hasidic movement, I very much grateful to my best friend Katerina Malachova, who is a real expert on Hasidism in Ukrainian,
Okay. Well,
lands. So she might know it much better than me. I'm very much amateur in this field.
we're all beginners.
But I'm attending all these saint places. I was in Medjugorje, I was in Mezhirich. By the way, in Medjugorje, I attended Shabbat with other my friends and colleagues and people who is in Jewish traditions. So it was absolutely fantastic.
It's Ukraine has got a magical landscape full of these spiritual.
Yeah, true. It's very true.
And I look forward to the time when we can end the war. We can get some spiritual tourism going again.
Actually, we did it because we're doing a lot of tours with Katya Malachova. It was organized plenty of tours on these spiritual places, and she conducting the project called Sangation, and many young people coming with her and become familiar with this heritage. So
Good.
this is
That flourish, yes. So my question, I know that you might want to refer this to someone, but I'm a bit of an expert on the Qabalah, a bit of a historian of the Qabalah. At the moment, I'm writing a book for another thing about the influence of the Qabalah on Freud. And it's definite that Freud was influenced and inspired by the Qabalah. And
oh my goodness,
ancestors were Hasidic Jews. I mean, so there's all kinds of, in a sense, Freud created a sort of secular Hasidic confessional system, the psychoanalytical, intimacy of the couch. I mean, so that's just one thing. I've written another paper about how Marx was inspired by the Kabbalistic tradition, with the idea of the redemption of the proletariat. That's the tick of the poorest, and there's evidence that Marx himself had studied the Qabalah and knew what he was doing. So my question is like, who is studying the Qabalah in the history of Ukrainian thought? Is there anyone that you know of? I mean, it should be done. And the tragedy, of course, so many were killed when the Germans invaded. And they massacred loads of the Jews, but who
definitely
Qabalah in Ukraine that you know of?
Actually, Hasidic movement, actually, it's very much connected, so based on this studying of Qabalah. And when I was in this tour, we come into one places where one Shem Tov was living, or another places where another prominent Kabbalist lived. So it was a very elaborated tradition. But personally, I learned about Kabbalah from academic texts, from Gershon Scholem, from Hidel, from Tirbi, and I have several amazing lectures of Israeli, you can say.
Are there any
teacher? Her name is Esther Bitos. She has her, teacher of Kabbalah. She is real, very much involved. She connects her life with reading Kabbalistic text. And so I would say this is what I know about Kabbalah, and I know this is a very specific. It's absolutely blown-minded, and
it's very interesting.
and at the same time, it's very exotic. I'm sorry. Yes, but yes. What's your question?
No. I mean, the Kabbalah is sort of you see, I'm what they call a meta Kabbalist. So I think the Kabbalah plugs back into an oral tradition.
Mhm.
Obviously, that's the whole point of the Kabbalah. So there's the written texts of the Torah, the Bible, but then there's this oral tradition that predates it. I mean, the Bible was written down, only within, well, the last, if you think that the Temple of Solomon and David had scribes writing, then that's 3,000 ago. That's the first time. Whereas the Kabbalah predates that. This is the teaching that I've encountered. And I think, therefore, if we're going to try and plug into that oral tradition, predating the Kabbalah, predating the written text, and we're trying to recover a philosophical orality, which is universal in its origin, that might serve as a basis for peace thinking. So, I've written this book called The Qabalah Runes, where I link it back to the Old Norse teachings, which were oral, going back to Odin. And this idea that each letter is a manifestation of the divine. The Jewish alphabet, as you know, each letter is divine. And
Yes.
Kabbalist learns the meaning of each letter. It has a gender, it has a number, and it has a place in the cosmic Sephirot. So the Sephirot of manifestation, each letter has a place on the tree of life, right? Now that's a beautiful, beautiful idea. But what I discovered as an expert in comparative religion is the Norse sages, the rune masters, had exactly the same idea, independently. Only they said Odin created these things, the runes. They're the letter shapes, and each one is a sound of the God's activity in the world. And rune experts have a similar tree, the tree of Yggdrasil, which they map. And in my study, I compared and contrasted the runic cosmology with the Kabbalistic cosmology. And there's only one other guy that's ever attempted that. He was the chief advisor to Queen Christina of Sweden, the one that converted to Catholicism and went to live in Rome, renounced her throne. And Descartes was her teacher as well. So anyway, I'm just thinking, how can we get the universal wisdom of Ukraine in this amazing, there's the Christian, there's the original Slavic wisdom, there's the Jewish wisdom that came in, there are the Islamic wisdom. I'd love to live in a world where wisdom was valued more than war and killing. And yet, my last question is,
I
why?
want to respond to this last sentence of yours. Of course, I'm not an expert in Kabbalah, and my head became dizzy when you did all these parallels. And yes, but okay, this is your field of interest. But I may say I very much inspired by Jain attitude, because they not pay attention, on tradition or ethnicity. They just look to the value. If you and value is a very universal, feature. So I remember that I was very much surprised when I was on the first Jain school that people easily could call you Christian and Jain, or Jewish and Jain, or atheist and Jain, because if you pursue some value, if you conduct non-harmfully and try to be in harmony with the world, you already share Jain values. And I think the value is the answer to your question. This is a base of universal wisdom, not certain tradition, but. And again, I'm very rationally based. Probably this interview not show that, but I'm really, rely on critical thinking and rational argumentation and discussion.
Great, yeah. Thank you. Well, that leads to a little supplementary question. So I know you've just been studying Prakrit. I'm fascinated by alphabets. What is the alphabet the Jain scriptures are written in, this Prakrit?
So this is the same as Sanskrit, Devanagari. So this is the same letters, but this is the most if I'm eligible to identify this as a spoken language, spoken Sanskrit is a literary language. Prakrit is a spoken language. It is more simple. It's have more simple grammar and vocabulary. A lot of dialects, really a lot. And their literal translation of Prakrit is authentic, is genuine, is how people speak, not how people write, but how people speak. Because Sanskrit, in a certain extent, not certain, it was an artificially made language in a sense with elaborated grammar, elaborated rules, etc. Prakrit is a spoken tradition.
So what would be a Greek word for wisdom, say? We talked about Sophia in the Greek tradition. What's the Prakrit equivalent to Sophia? Is there a word?
I remember the word Jnana, but not from my Prakrit, not from my not from my course, but from my Jain studies. So actually, here on this course, we studied some. Actually, we didn't read any text. People just explain us how the main rules, the main morphology and grammar of Prakrit. So if you, I cannot be expert on Prakrit, but.
So I think the word would be Kaivalya Jnana, isn't it? That's the highest wisdom. Kaivalya Jnana is what you get if you go to Jain. And I believe the etymology means like clear, complete, holistic, joined up wisdom. So it's what we call the polymath thing, which brings us back to Skovoroda. Yes. He's someone on the path to Kaivalya Jnana, which is, I think, the path of all true intellectuals. Talking of which, my last question, I know it's, I'm really grateful for your time here, and it's been lovely to talk to you, but one of the intellectuals I've learned most from about the Ukraine war is Tim Snyder, professor of history at Yale. I think this man is a genius. He wrote The Road to Unfreedom, and he also wrote a terrible book called Bloodlands. And I've read them both in the last few months. And I learned from him that more people have died on Ukrainian soil in the 20th century than anywhere else in the world. And they were killed by both Stalin during the Holodomor, and then the Germans, who came in and slaughtered both Ukrainians and Jews. Like loads of intellectuals were killed in the Holodomor, and we were never taught this. When I studied East European history at the University of London, complete silence. Nobody talked about this. And I was at a specialist institute, for God's sake. When did you become aware as a young person about the Holodomor? Was it talked about in your family?
Yes, I've got it. I've got the point. So thank you for asking me this question, because definitely this is our trauma of my Ukrainians, trauma of, let me explain. There is no surprise that you heard nothing about Holodomor, because topic was totally forbidden and was not spoken in the Soviet Union. If you ask me when first time I heard about Holodomor, it was one shocking phrase which was said by my grandmother. I was 11 years old. I was in Donetsk region, in her house, in her building. And he said, it was so many people were swollen with hunger, and because of my mind is always has images, I just imagine these blue skin people which swollen in hunger. I was just 11 years old, and it was like it was blow-minded first, and in a bad sense, and it was quite traumatic. And what happening with people usually there is two possibilities: or they remember to the end of their life with praise, or forgetting immediately. This is mechanism of defense to forget immediately. I remember till today this phrase, and she also mentioned at the same time that it was just one phrase during her whole life. Another phrase, we were survived because we have a core, and our mother bring us from one place to another. That's why we became alive. That's it. When I was 15 and I was in Ukrainian humanitarian license, people start, and it was, of course, after Soviet Union fell apart. It was already independence, time of independence of Ukraine. People show us film movie about Holodomor, and I saw some documentaries about all of these things. It's you know, it's quite comparable to the Holocaust in Jewish tradition. It's a huge trauma, absolutely. And it was one poetry I remember from this my teenage time, that how Ukrainians defined the 20th century. So this is a century which is crossed on the cross of Holodomor. And why such a comparison with the Christ? Because remember the dates, 1933, the age of Christ, 33. Yes, the epoch which have an age of Christ were crossed on the cross of Holodomor. And so it's one thing. Another thing was, yeah,
I have a supplementary question for you. Thank you so much for sharing that family story, because having read Tim Snyder's books, you know, he's constructed the story of the Holodomor based on those personal testimonies, and it's shocking. But I just wish it was taught in Russian education. I mean, I wish Putin would ring me up and say, Thomas, I'm sorry about the invasion. I'm withdrawing the troops. We want to appoint you Minister of Education in Russia. And I would insist that every Russian school child learn about Ukraine's history properly. They should learn about Skovoroda. They should learn about the Holodomor. They should learn about how so many people died on Ukrainian soil. They should learn about the Hasidic movement. And I believe, you know, education is the answer. If they knew all that, there's no way they would go to the front line. They would know their brothers and sisters. I think that Putin and co, and it's manipulate people's opinion through withholding knowledge. A philosopher gives away knowledge. The opposite of a philosopher, an anti-philosopher or something, they withhold and manipulate knowledge, like the Bolsheviks, like Lazar Kaganovich and Stalin,
yes.
past masters at manipulating knowledge, you know. So I suppose it's a sort of supplementary question. I presume the Holodomor isn't taught in Russian education. They don't even know about it, do they? I mean, and am I right in saying that Putin has banned discussion of Stalin's role in causing World War II? It was because of his pact with Hitler that we got World War II unleashed on Poland. I mean, I'm a historian, you know, I know that's a fact. Tim Snyder knows it's a fact. But if I was in Russia, I would be arrested for saying that now. Is that true?
Yes, true.
But that's shocking.
Yeah, that's shocking. But Thomas, let us see the other absolutely horrible fact. Many people in Russian Federation has access to TV, and they know very well what's going on in Bucha, in Gostomel, in Irpin, in Izium, in Kherson region, when Kherson region was already liberated. They found, I just try not to crime, but I need to tell it.
They found more.
We find tortured room for children. Tortured room for children. So, and people know about this. So, how to explain it?
It's not shown on Russian television, is it?
It's very much shown on the internet, and people who want to know, they will know. And plus, one more thing, you know, it's also interesting self-defense mechanism, because I'm connected with some people from Moscow via Facebook, and I'm watching their news just to understand what's going on in their mind. Do you know what they say about Bucha? Do you know what they say about massacre in Bucha near Kiev region, not far from my?
Yeah.
So they say that it's definitely fake, because the body lies very artificially. So probably it was insinuated by Ukrainian government.
CIA probably helped, and I mean, it's all, they twist everything into an anti-Western meme.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
But, it's, this goes back to, talking about the Qabalah, I'm reading a book called The Tree of Evil. We have the Tree of Life.
Mm-hmm.
The Tree of Evil is what's called the Klippot, which is the husks of...
Yes, I know this part, yeah.
And it inverts everything that the Tree of Life stands for, the virtues, goodness, truth, love, justice. The Tree of Evil inverts them. So it has lies, hatred, aggression, violence. And it's, as I'm watching modern history unfolding, it's like I'm watching the adherents of the two trees having an argument about which reality is going to dominate. And I don't know, it's a philosophical, my last philosophical question is, how can we pull the plug on the Tree of Evil? How can we stop it getting any more electricity? It's a metaphysical question.
I know, it's maybe I'm thinking about it, and I'm asking first of all myself, what will be the proper answer, what will be the most honest answer from me right now. I think we should carefully investigate the phenomenon, why critical thinking collapsed, why ideologists brainwashed human mind so seriously that people who collide with truth, who are seeing truth by seeing the fact by his own eyes, did not believe what they're seeing, but inverted to vice versa. So I'm thinking, yes, about what's going on in Russian Federation. I'm thinking about anti-vaccinated movement. I'm thinking about Trumpist movement. I'm thinking about all people who supported Brexit in the UK. I'm in the UK. I see that many people, so many regrets about this decision right now. And how people so smoothly brainwashed. This is the main question for me. So what's going on with critical thinking? Why ideologist is so, effective? What is key of this efficacy? This is what we should.
Explanation. I mean, it's a sort of charisma. It's a sociology of knowledge explanation, and it's the power and the control of the media.
Yes.
And all that, it's a heady brew. It's a propaganda exercise. But I mean, I think you can even look around Cambridge. And when I went to university and studied philosophy at Bristol, I wanted to know ultimate truth. I wanted to meet a Skovoroda and be taught what wisdom is. Instead, I met very clever Wittgensteinians who told me there is no such thing as truth. There is only language. And I'm a stupid romantic idealist to even ask for truth.
That's one branch of philosophy.
I read a book about, which seems to me, by an Australian philosopher, which seems to me to prove that Wittgenstein was recruited by the KGB.
Oh my goodness. Don't you think this is conspiracy theory already?
No. Have you come across that? Have you come across that book?
No, never.
Okay, now I'll send you a link. And did you know that Wittgenstein was offered a chair of philosophy in somewhere like Kazan in a Soviet university? And he was friends with the journalist who worked for the New York Times in Moscow, friend of Stalin, who was denying the Holodomor. Can't remember his name. Some famous American journalist who was in Moscow saying, no, Holodomor not happening. No, it's all ridiculous. Trust Father Stalin. The New York Times was publishing his denials, Now, he was a friend of Wittgenstein, and that's all revealed in this book. So I was mind blown when I read this book. Was that why Wittgenstein spread this meme in British philosophy departments, which was all pure materialism, you know? And he was a magician. He was a magician. So anyway,
I think Wittgenstein will be still our heritage, as well as Heidegger. Also, Heidegger is also contaminated with, you know, fascist, you know.
Well, obviously, but one
yes, but
redeem Heidegger easier than one can redeem Wittgenstein. But you know, that's a discussion for another day.
This is discussion of other day. Yeah.
Anyway, look, it's been lovely to talk to you, Larysa. Thank you so much. I love
Thank
to
you.
And
yes.
Tell the philosophy department to investigate that book. I'll send you the links about it. If Wittgenstein was in the KGB, shouldn't they do something about it? You know, but anyway, no, look, seriously, these are very weighty matters we've discussed, and it's historic. We're at the solstice, which symbolizes for the Druid world the return of the light. So let's hope that our little discussion helps a bit more light be shed on what's happening in Ukraine and what Skovoroda, you know, I think these people are important because they symbolize the light intellectually past. And so let's honor his memory by trying to live up to the heritage he's left us and all the other great thinkers we've talked about today. Yeah. Okay, bless. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, happy solstice.